The desert didn't forgive weakness. It swallowed everything, light, sound, even hope. The wind carried the heat like a living thing, pressing against the skin until it burned, and in the middle of that endless expanse of sand and silence, a single figure lay half buried in dust, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of her chest. Her name was Captain Mara Jensen, Delta Force operative, or at least she used to be. The mission had gone wrong before it even began. Intelligence was flawed, the extraction compromised, and the team ambushed by insurgents who seemed to know every step they would take. When the smoke cleared and the gunfire died, the desert took on an eerie stillness. The team believed she was gone, a casualty of the explosion that tore their convoy apart. They had no choice but to retreat under orders, leaving her behind in the chaos. But Mara wasn't dead. Not yet. When consciousness returned, she found herself surrounded by wreckage and silence. Her ears rang, her uniform torn and soaked with sweat and blood. Every breath felt like it scraped through fire. For a moment she almost wished she hadn't woken up, but then she saw it. A single patch of sky above the dust, vast and merciless, daring her to move. And she did. Crawling first, then stumbling, one agonizing step at a time through the desert that stretched endlessly in every direction. No food, no water, no radio, just the training that whispered inside her head. Calm, controlled, deliberate. Delta training didn't teach surrender. It taught survival. And so when her mind screamed for rest, she remembered the creed carved into her bones. You don't stop when you're tired. You stop when you're done. Days blurred together. The heat became her enemy, the cold her punishment. At night, the temperature plunged and she shivered under a torn piece of parachute fabric she'd salvaged from the wreck. Scorpions crawled near her boots, their faint movement reminding her that life still existed, just not the kind that cared whether she lived or died. But even as her body weakened, her will sharpened. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting to prove that being left behind didn't mean being forgotten. On the 5th day, she found the remains of a downed drone half buried in the sand. The camera still flickered faintly. Using what little strength she had left, she rigged a flare from its battery, wiring, and a bullet casing. It was a desperate attempt, a signal that might never be seen. But when the spark finally lit the air, it cut through the desert like a heartbeat, brief, defiant, alive. Miles away, a recon pilot spotted the flash. Hours later, the desert's silence shattered with the sound of helicopter rotors. Dust swirled around her like a storm as voices called out through the haze. When the medics reached her, she was half-conscious, sunburned and barely breathing, but her grip was still tight around the dog tags she'd pulled from the sand. Not her own, but those of her fallen teammate, whose last promise was that they'd all go home. She made sure he did. When she opened her eyes again, she was in a field hospital. The first thing she heard wasn't the monitors, it was disbelief. Her old team stood at her bedside silent, guilt written in every line of their faces. They had left her believing she was gone, buried under the wreckage of the desert. Yet here she was, alive, unbroken, staring back at them with eyes that carried both pain and peace. The commanding officer couldn't find the words. He didn't need to. Mara simply looked at them, nodded once, and whispered, "Delta doesn't fear death." It wasn't arrogance. It was truth. The kind born from walking through the kind of fire that strips away everything but purpose. Weeks later, when she returned to the base, the others stood in quiet formation. No applause. No ceremony. Just silence. The kind of silence that only soldiers understand. The kind that carries respect heavier than words ever could. Mara didn't tell them much about those 6 days in the desert. She didn't have to. Every scar spoke for her. Every step she took across the tarmac was proof that even when the world turns its back, strength can still rise from the sand. And from that day, her name carried weight far beyond Delta, because it wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of what it means to refuse oblivion, to look death in the face and keep walking. They left her to die in the desert. But the desert, in its cruel and sacred silence, taught her to live again. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that true strength comes from rising when the world counts you out, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to States of History. Every story we tell honors the courage, resilience, and quiet heroism of those who refuse to break. Special request. Tell us in the comments, what does true survival mean to you?